Hey everybody, welcome to the Conspiracy Theory Fun Show. Today we're going to be talking about critiques on Jordan Peterson and different theories I have about him. Basically, he's just like a very fierce Canadian psychologist, and he's just really intense, really scary. If you think about Canada, I'm terrified of Canada. As an American, they sit on the northern border, and they could swoop down anytime, like with the Royal Canadian Mounties and stuff like that. And if you say Canada and Jordan Peterson, it's a pretty scary combination. They could have 10 U.S. slaves for every one Canadian, so there's a lot of motivation there. And then also, if you think about Putin, also shares a big border with Canada, and that's probably basically why he's driving south into Ukraine to make more space for the Russian people, because Peterson is terrifying. He's also says he's been sick, probably was just gathering forces up in Canada, and then he's coming down here to like soften up American defense. Biden's probably putting people up on the northern border to make a buffer zone and confuse the Canadian invasion. Anyways, then doubling down on my Musk commitment, every YouTube video over 10 minutes should probably mention him once in some way or another, maybe just EV cars or something like that, or just rockets and stuff like that. But that's basically the idea, is that it's just pretty much just happening anyway, so might as well make it official. And then it's also helping the algorithms. Everybody knows that the word algorithms comes from Al Gore, who said he made the internet, and so that's why algorithms are so important with like YouTube and keeping those happy. So that's pretty cool. So what does Jordan Peterson really represent? And I guess a practical sense is, I think, before I get into the critiques, he's kind of the rise of a sort of patriarchal defense, I guess, among like people that look like me, So like there's never really been an organized patriarchy in Western culture. It's basically just been that nature has been kind of authoritative, and then one side of the human beings has been kind of dealing with that, and that's been then the males of the species, obviously. So that's basically kind of organizing that. So that gets into my first point, is looking at the patriarchy and matriarchy. Just saying that he kind of represents the rise of a patriarchy that has never been organized, and if you again think of it, the males of the species have been then kind of like a shield or rocket engine shield, shooting out against nature, driving us forward, and the females are kind of like the arrow tip, driving away from nature and the authoritative structures of nature. And so the shield's never been organized, because nature was really strong, it just was in place. And then as you took away nature and authoritative structures, like maybe like 200 years ago in the West at least, then you have all these like confused males that have no idea what they're doing anymore. And then you get like the ruckus of like World War II and stuff like that, which basically is like tamping down on males too, because just there's no nature to fight, so just killing each other until there's not that much more patriarchal forces anymore, because there's no point. So I'll talk about that another thing, but that's, I think, basically my first critique on Jordan Peterson is that's their kind of reason. The second critique is his viewpoint on a lot of historical figures. I think one comes to mind specifically is his viewpoint on Muhammad. Is kind of pretty, from what I saw a video like 3 or 4 years ago, was like pretty negative. Actually this is like 2.5 years ago. And I just like to point out, I don't think that was really fair given the historical circumstances of Muhammad. Like, if you took the arc of his life, as far as like different aspects of the things that he advocated, he was like a vast improvement over the time, like as far as like feminism goes and stuff like that. And one thing that I think Islam doesn't do so well in talking about Muhammad is that they don't take the arc of his life and update it to modern times. They kind of take the arc of his life and then try and make modern times fit that arc, right? And so if you think about Muhammad, like he was actually really trying to be like a second Jesus for like the first 12 years, and it just didn't really work. It worked actually pretty well. Like he had like over 100 followers and stuff like that, but not like Jesus level well. And then he just took a year off and was like, hey, this isn't working. I'm going to try something else. And the Arabs didn't really need a second Jesus because Jesus existed in peace times, where the Arab world at that point was basically like, it was like really terrible. It was caught between these two empires fighting. They were just killing a lot of people in Arabia. So the Arabs really needed a military figure too. And so if you think about Muhammad, think about just combining like Jesus and Charlemagne into one historical figure. And then you kind of get Muhammad. So that then brings to my third point, where Jordan Peterson is raising Jesus up, and people like Gandhi up. They existed in pretty peaceful situations. Jesus existed in the Roman Empire, and Gandhi existed in the British Empire and Indian space, obviously. And so a lot of like the bloodshed, like people don't think of Gandhi as a violent guy because he wasn't, but a lot of the violence was basically done for him. That's in the form of, Hitler basically draining the resources of the British Empire. If I'm not praising Hitler, I'm not saying this is the intended consequences, but if the coffers, the money bags of the British Empire were full, they probably wouldn't have given up India so easily. It probably would have had to become violent, and they probably would have needed someone not like Gandhi, but more like Muhammad, to lead them to wherever they are, wherever they would go. So then again, this is just in the fourth point. He's criticizing Stalin a lot, and Stalin again is like a dog in a dog eat dog world. Like he was actually pretty like reactionary to the times, Stalin was. And then if you think about it, like he probably had his heart broken a couple times. Like Hitler didn't make peace with him, then he had to fight this defensive war, do all that stuff, and millions of his people died. It was pretty bad. And then the Americans were also like didn't make peace with them too, and so you had the whole Cold War for a lot of years too, for his end of his life. So it's kind of unfair how the West treats Stalin. Not that he didn't like do stuff that maybe was questionable, but like he really couldn't have known better. And there really weren't that many options for him. And that's the same argument that he uses to defend the Constitution and the Three-Fifths Compromise too. If you just apply that to Stalin, I think that's more fair. Then the fifth point that I'd like to talk about with Jordan Peterson and his ilk and his contemporaries is the use of the term Judeo-Christian culture. I think that's a very big oversimplification, and also it's just disrespectful to a lot of people. I think the people that it disrespects the most are basically the Italians and the Greeks. And I would say it also disrespects, I'm half German, so it disrespects the Germans, probably the British too, and also the French, and pretty much Egypt, Carthage, pretty much every group that's contributed to like Western culture and what it is today, probably even the Middle East, and India probably disrespects India too. Yeah, pretty much does. So I would say as a, and also it just doesn't make sense. It's like two sides of the same thing. Christian is going away from Judaism, so it's kind of like just this weird term. So I would say, as opposed to that, I would say we're pretty much for the positiveness, I would say we're Clausian culture. This gets back to my first video about how clauses are awesome, and everybody basically is agreeing on the clauses. They are awesome. So that's a fundamental part of our culture. And then also just World War II is like a huge part of our culture, and it's kind of like the negative side of our culture. Like what everybody's kind of worried about is going back to those sort of things that happened there. So I would say we have like World War II Clausian culture, not really Judeo-Christianity. And then also just if you listen to the radio, like country music radio, or look at Hollywood and stuff like that, it's just not Judeo-Christian. Just, you guys got to get off that horse there. So then I'd say the sixth point that Jordan Peterson is missing is that the West is not like as great as it is. Like if you just think about the stability of the West. Like, it's had very instable ideas for the last couple hundred years, and maybe that's why maybe the West is actually the experimental station of the world right now, and like everybody else has to kind of learn from the West, is look at what the West tried out and look at all the failings and then do better there. And that has become a very unstable biological situation. You know, if you look at the West, the Petersons and those type of people are like worried about it, you know, worried about birth rates. I kind of think that's like a filter that's correcting itself, you know, as things get cleared up. And then, you know, the Western filter biologically has been the most dramatic of any, you know, like if you take China, you know, we say that they killed like millions of like little children, girls and stuff like that, but they have a population of 2 billion, you know, right? So they're doing pretty well biologically, stuff like that. So the West really needs to like tamp down on its criticism of other cultures, I think, and then just hope that the filter that has been basically the most dramatic filter of all time finishes, and then the ideas get sorted out and everybody can go on their way. And then that's just point number 7. Switching new ideas takes time. You know, like if you look at the green movement, you know, like first a company was greenwashing, you know, because it's really hard to actually go from being like a normal company to like an environmental company. So you have to have like the greenwashing period, you know, like where you're kind of thinking about things, where you're kind of trying things out, getting everybody on the right page, you know. Again, if you think about communism too, you know, it's not been really that great yet, but you know, you have to have communist washing then, you know, where everybody's thinking about these ideas. Communism is actually, if you think about it, like a Judeo-Christian culture. You know, Karl Marx was, you know, German Jew, you know, Judeo-Christianity right there, you know. And so that, not saying like communism is going to be adapted fully, but like the ideas and the integration takes time. It's just like when you're trying something new, you know, like you go from like your old system, which worked pretty well, you know, and then you go through this massive long phase where you're like trying things out, trying to like, you know, work on your, I don't know, like tennis stroke, you know, something like that, like your serving stroke in tennis. And then eventually you kind of start getting it and things kind of settle down and you have it, you know. So I'd say that is a good kind of thing, is like we have all these washing processes in the West, and that's where he's unfairly saying like democracy and capitalism from America is the right way, you know. And looking at America now, it's pretty obvious that there's some troubles there, you know. And so saying that we should double down on that is also disingenuous when you're doing so much criticism of communism at the same time, you know. Like I don't love communism. I'm an American patriot. I like the Constitution, but you know, hating on communism is not part of the solution, is what I'm trying to say. Then the 8th and final point, I think, just to kind of bring this home, is that since we are basically a World War II culture, with clauses also being the positive side of that, then you have to look at what are the lessons of World War II and have they been learned. And I think that when you look at modern day Germany, when you look at like the United States, when you look at the worlds, there's also massive oversimplification, you know, like blaming everything on racism, you know. And if you just look at the craziness that went on, and Jordan Peterson starts to get into this, but he doesn't fully drive home this point, is that basically, you know, the lessons of World War II have not been really learned, and that should be really looked at again. It's basically the Germans in 20 years rewrote the New Testament, the Old Testament, you know. So that's pretty significant there, and so those lessons there probably need to be learned, and that would probably be a better thing than not learning them. Anyways, I'm basically done with my talk now. If you like what I'm doing, you know, you can subscribe. I'm gonna try and make like a video every 2 or 3 days, and hope for the best. And you can always send something from my wife in Germany. I have faith in the German postal system, you know, so you can just send some nice flowers or something. We'll see if it gets here. It'll be a nice experiment, you know. But if you don't like what I'm doing, I'm sorry. I'm trying to be positive. If you disagree with me, just, you know, maybe we can work something out. Love you. Bye.